The ballroom went dead silent when the heavy thud of a body hit the marble floor. A 250-pound woman from the south side of Chicago had just threatened the most dangerous capo in the Midwest. What happened next wasn't a massacre. It was a twisted obsession that would burn an empire to the ground. The annual winter charity gala at the historic Astor Mansion in Chicago was never really about charity. It was a glittering facade, a gathering of the city's political elite rubbing shoulders with the men who truly ran the streets. Beatrice Gallagher knew this better than anyone. As the owner of Sugar and Sin, a highly sought-after boutique catering company, she was hired to build a sprawling, three-tiered Venetian dessert table that anchored the grand ballroom. Beatrice was 28, exhausted, and unapologetically taking up space. She was a fat woman in a room entirely populated by socialites who survived on lemon water and cocaine. She wore a custom-tailored, deep emerald-wrap dress that hugged her broad hips and generous curves, her dark hair pinned up in a severe, elegant twist. She didn't try to shrink herself to fit the high society mold. She stood tall behind her towers of cannolis and tiramisu, her presence solid grounded and intensely commanding. It was 11:30 p.m. when the trouble started. Vincent Moretti, a newly minted capo in the Castiglione crime family, had spent the last hour draining highball glasses of scotch. Vincent was a notoriously vicious man, a street-level enforcer who had brutally climbed the ranks. He was also a man who believed every woman in his line of sight was a commodity to be consumed. He swayed as he approached the dessert table, completely bypassing the pastries. His bloodshot eyes raked over Beatrice, pausing on the heavy curve of her breasts and the wide flare of her hips. "Well, well." Vincent slurred, leaning heavily against the linen-draped table, knocking over a silver tray of truffles. "Looks like they brought out the main course. You're a lot of woman, aren't you, sweetheart? I like a girl with some meat on her bones. Gives a man something to hold on to." Beatrice didn't flinch. She picked up a damp cloth and calmly wiped the frosting off the silver tray. "The desserts are for the guests, Mr. Moretti. If you'd like one, take it. Otherwise, you're in my way." Vincent's ugly, cruel laugh echoed over the string quartet playing in the background. A few socialites standing nearby noticed the interaction and quickly turned away, terrified of getting caught in Vincent's crosshairs. "Feisty Warsch." Vincent sneered, stepping around the table. He crowded into Beatrice's personal space, the reek of stale cigar smoke and cheap cologne overwhelming the scent of vanilla and sugar. He reached out his heavy, rough hand, clamping down hard on her fleshy waist, his fingers digging painfully into her side. "You think because you're the help you can talk to me like that? I could bend you over this table right now, and not a single suit in this room would blink." Beatrice went completely still. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a primal instinct screaming at her to run. But Beatrice Gallagher had survived growing up in a neighborhood where showing fear was a death sentence. She turned her head, her dark eyes locking onto Vincent's bloodshot ones with absolute sub-zero fury. "Touch me again and you'll regret it," Beatrice said. Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't a plea. It was a promise. Vincent blinked, genuinely stunned for a fraction of a second. Then his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "You fat bitch," he hissed, raising his hand to backhand her across the face. He never made contact. A hand encased in a bespoke black leather glove shot out from the shadows and clamped around Vincent's wrist. The grip was so sudden, so impossibly violent, that the sickening crack of bone echoed over the sudden silence of the ballroom. Vincent screamed, dropping to his knees, his wrist snapping backward at a gruesome angle. Standing behind him was Dominic Castiglione, the boss. Dominic was a ghost of a man who ruled the Midwestern underworld with absolute, terrifying precision. He was tall, dressed in a sharp charcoal, Tom Ford suit, his face a chilling mask of aristocratic indifference. His dark eyes devoid of any warmth, flicked from the whimpering capo on the floor to Beatrice. The entire ballroom had frozen. Politicians stopped mid-sip. Security guards went rigid. Everyone waited for Dominic to apologize for his man's behavior, or worse, to punish the caterer for causing a scene. Instead, Dominic released Vincent's shattered wrist and smoothly withdrew a pure white silk handkerchief from his breast pocket. He wiped his leather glove as if he had just touched raw sewage. "Carmine," Dominic said quietly, not raising his voice. His underboss, Carmine Falco, materialized from the crowd instantly. "Take Mr. Moretti to the meatpacking facility on Randolph Street." Dominic ordered, his voice like grinding ice. "Remove the hand he just used to touch Miss Gallagher. Then remove his tongue so he can never speak to her in that tone again." Vincent's eyes rolled back in horror. "Boss Dominic? Wait, please. She's a nobody. She's just a fucking baker." "Drag him out," Dominic commanded. Two massive men grabbed Vincent by his armpits and dragged him backward through the opulent ballroom. Vincent's frantic screaming echoed off the vaulted ceilings until the heavy oak doors slammed shut, sealing the silence. The crowd was paralyzed. Capos were untouchable. To mutilate a high-ranking earner over a verbal spat with civilian catering staff was unthinkable. It violated every rule of the syndicate. Dominic finally stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Beatrice. He towered over her, smelling of expensive cedarwood and cold night air. He looked down at her, his dark eyes tracing the defiance still burning in her expression, taking in the full, unyielding shape of her body. "Are you unharmed, Beatrice?" Dominic asked, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, intimate timbre that sent a shiver down her spine. Beatrice stared at him, her chest heaving. "How do you know my name?" Dominic offered a faint, razor-thin smile. "I know everything about you. Come with me. We have business to discuss, and you are no longer serving pastries." Beatrice didn't have a choice. When the head of the Castiglione family told you to follow him, you followed, or you ended up in the trunk of a Lincoln Town car. She walked beside him, through the labyrinthine halls of the Astor mansion, leaving the music and the terrified whispers of the gala behind. They entered a heavy mahogany-paneled library on the 3rd floor, the doors clicking shut with a terrifying finality. Dominic walked over to a crystal decanter on his desk, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid. He didn't offer her one. Instead, he leaned against the heavy oak desk, crossing his ankles, and watched her. Beatrice stood by the door. She didn't cross her arms or try to make herself smaller. She stood with her shoulders back, her emerald dress catching the dim light of the fireplace. "You just crippled your own captain," Beatrice stated, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was remarkably steady. "Over a waitress." "Why, you are not a waitress," Dominic corrected smoothly. "You own sugar and sin. You live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square. You visit your mother at the Silver Pines Care Facility every Sunday, paying her $5,000 monthly medical bills in cash. And you have an older brother named Thomas." Beatrice's blood ran cold. The mention of her brother was a physical blow. Thomas was a degenerate gambler, a man who had vanished 3 weeks ago, leaving Beatrice to fend off the aggressive collection calls. "What does Thomas have to do with this?" she demanded, her hands curling into fists. Dominic took a slow sip of his drink. 2 months ago, Thomas was hired as an accountant for a shell corporation owned by my family, a low-level logistics firm. Last week, we discovered that your brother had managed to embezzle $400,000 from our accounts. He thought he covered his tracks. He didn't. Beatrice felt the floor tilt beneath her. $400,000 from the Mafia. It was a death sentence, not just for Thomas, but for her and their mother. The cartel rules were simple. Blood repays blood. "I don't have that kind of money," Beatrice said, her voice finally cracking. "I swear to God, I didn't know. If I sell the business my equipment, I can get you 50,000 by Friday. I'll pay it all back." "I don't need your money, Beatrice," Dominic said, setting his glass down. He pushed off the desk and walked slowly toward her. He moved like a predator, silent and fluid. He stopped just inches from her, so close she could see the faint gold flecks in his dark eyes. "When I found out about the theft," Dominic murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth, "the order was already given to burn your bakery to the ground with you inside it. Thomas was to be found in pieces in the Chicago River. That was the plan for tonight." Beatrice stopped breathing. She was standing in a room with her executioner. "But then," Dominic continued, raising a gloved hand. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before gently brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind Beatrice's ear. The touch was feather-light, reverent, a stark, jarring contrast to the violence he had just unleashed downstairs. "I watched you." Beatrice swallowed hard. "Watched me. I watched you navigate a room full of vipers," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a hypnotic rasp. "I watched you stand your ground. Most women in your position shrink. They apologize for existing. They fold themselves into tiny, digestible pieces to make the men around them comfortable. But not you. You stood there solid and defiant, and you looked a killer in the eye and promised him ruin." Dominic leaned in his lips, brushing the shell of her ear. "It was the most magnificent thing I have ever seen." Beatrice shivered, torn between absolute terror and a bizarre magnetic pull toward the dangerous man crowding her space. "What do you want from me, Mr. Castiglione?" Dominic stepped back, his business mask slamming back into place. "I am stepping into the legitimate political sphere of Chicago next year. To do that, I cannot look like a bachelor gangster. I need a wife. Not a socialite who does cocaine in the bathroom of the Ritz, and not a Mafia princess. I need a woman with a spotless record, a self-made business owner, someone the public will love and respect." He walked back to his desk and opened a drawer, tossing a thick manila folder onto the polished wood. "Your brother's debt is forgiven," Dominic stated coldly. "His life is spared. In exchange, you will marry me. You will wear my ring. You will live in my estate. And you will stand by my side in public as my devoted wife. You will be untouchable. As you saw tonight, anyone who breathes wrong in your direction will be dismantled." Beatrice stared at the folder. It was a contract for her life. "And if I say no, then Carmine will finish his work," Dominic replied smoothly. "And Thomas will be fished out of the river on Tuesday." It wasn't a choice. It was a trap forged in velvet and steel. Beatrice looked at the man who had just brutally maimed someone to protect her, a man who was now legally enslaving her. She walked over to the desk, her emerald dress swishing against her heavy thighs. She didn't look at the papers. She looked Dominic dead in the eye. "You think you can buy me with my brother's life?" Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You think you're saving me. But if you put a ring on my finger, Dominic, you better be prepared for the fact that I won't just be your prop. I won't be quiet, and I won't be obedient." Dominic Castiglione stared at the magnificent, furious, beautiful woman standing before him. For the first time all night, a genuine, terrifying smile broke across his face. "I am counting on it, Mia Regina. The transition from a two-bedroom apartment in Logan Square to the sprawling, heavily guarded Castiglione estate in Lake Forest was violently abrupt. Beatrice Gallagher didn't pack a bag. She was simply relocated. By Monday morning, she woke up in a master suite, the size of her entire bakery, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets, with a 4-carat emerald-cut diamond weighing down her left hand. Dominic kept his word. Her brother Thomas's debts were wiped clean, though Thomas was promptly sent to a rehabilitation facility in upstate New York that Beatrice heavily suspected was just a gilded prison to ensure her continued cooperation. Her mother's medical bills were paid a year in advance. Beatrice's life as she knew it was over. But if Dominic Castiglione thought he was bringing home a quiet, malleable civilian to decorate his mansion, he was severely mistaken. The first clash occurred on a Thursday, 4 days into her captivity. Dominic had summoned his inner circle, the remaining capos, his sharp-tongued Aunt Carmela, and his financial advisors for a private catered dinner in the estate's grand dining room to officially introduce his future wife. A team of Italian stylists had arrived that afternoon with racks of designer clothes. They had taken one look at Beatrice's 250-pound frame and immediately tried to force her into a shapeless dark navy muumuu to disguise her proportions. Beatrice had physically thrown the stylist out of her suite. When Beatrice finally descended the sweeping mahogany staircase that evening, the low murmur of conversation in the foyer abruptly died. She had bypassed the stylists completely and called her own seamstress from the south side. Beatrice wore a breathtaking blood-red velvet gown that featured a plunging sweetheart neckline cinched violently at her waist before cascading over her wide, heavy hips. She wore her weight like armor. She was voluptuous, imposing, and completely unashamed, her dark hair tumbling over her bare, pale shoulders. She paired it with Christian Louboutin heels she had bought with her own bakery profits 3 years ago. Dominic was standing by the fireplace, nursing a glass of Macallan 25. When he saw her, the glass stalled halfway to his mouth. A dark, primal hunger flashed in his eyes, a look so intense it made the hairs on the back of Beatrice's neck stand up. He crossed the room, the crowd of dangerous men parting for him instantly. "You look like a queen." Dominic murmured his voice, a low gravel meant only for her. His gloved hand settled on the deep curve of her hip, his thumb pressing possessively into the plush flesh through the velvet. "My queen, I look like myself, Dominic," Beatrice replied, her voice cool and carrying just enough for the nearest guests to hear. "I won't be hidden in oversized silk like a shameful secret." Dominic's lips twitched in a rare, genuine smirk. "I would burn the city before I ever hid you." The dinner, however, was a battlefield. They sat at a massive mahogany table imported from Florence. To Beatrice's right sat Aunt Carmela, a severe woman dripping in Mikimoto pearls who had spent the first 2 courses glaring at Beatrice's plate. Across from her sat Lorenzo Russo, a notoriously arrogant capo who managed the family's West Side extortion rackets. As the main course, a heavy osso buco was served. Lorenzo leaned back, swirling his Barolo wine. He looked at Beatrice with naked contempt. "So, Miss Gallagher," Lorenzo drawled his voice, cutting through the clinking of silver. "A baker. It's an interesting choice for the boss. I suppose it explains the hearty appetite. But tell me, how exactly does a girl who spends her days frosting cupcakes expect to survive in our world? This isn't a kitchen. Weakness gets you killed." A tense silence fell over the room. Several men looked down at their plates. Aunt Carmela dabbed her lips, looking thoroughly entertained. Dominic sat at the head of the table, his expression completely unreadable. He didn't intervene. He was watching Beatrice, waiting to see how she would play her hand. Beatrice set her fork down. She didn't blush. She didn't shrink. She picked up her heavy crystal wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. "You're right, Lorenzo," Beatrice said smoothly, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "I do run a kitchen, and running a commercial kitchen in Chicago requires managing supply chains, negotiating with corrupt sanitation inspectors, and balancing ledgers down to the penny so my margins don't collapse. Which is why when Dominic gave me the shell company files to review yesterday, the ones my idiot brother was working on, I found something very interesting." Lorenzo's smug smile faltered. Beatrice leaned forward, her red velvet bodice straining against the table. I noticed that the West Side sanitation routes, the ones you oversee, are bleeding cash. There's a phantom fuel surcharge being applied to all 12 garbage trucks. It amounts to roughly $80,000 a month. That money isn't going to the Teamsters, and it certainly isn't going into Dominic's accounts. So you tell me, Lorenzo, who is weak? The baker who catches an $80,000 leak in 10 minutes of reading, or the capo who thinks his boss is too stupid to notice he's skimming from the pot? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the suffocating, terrifying quiet of a bomb dropping. Lorenzo turned ashen, his eyes darting frantically to Dominic. "Boss, Dominic, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's a civilian bitch making up numbers." Lorenzo Dominic interrupted. His voice was a soft, lethal whisper. Lorenzo snapped his mouth shut. Dominic didn't look at his capo. He kept his dark, glittering eyes locked on Beatrice. The raw admiration in his gaze was terrifying. "My fiancée," Dominic said slowly, "has a mind sharper than a razor. If she says you are skimming Lorenzo, you are skimming." Dominic waved a hand dismissively toward the shadows. "Carmine." The underboss stepped out from the perimeter. "Yes, boss. Take Lorenzo to the basement. I want every cent accounted for before you put a bullet in his head." Lorenzo didn't even have time to scream before 2 guards gagged him and dragged him from his chair, hauling him out of the dining room. Aunt Carmela stared at Beatrice, her jaw slightly slack, the pearls trembling at her throat. Beatrice calmly picked up her fork, cut a piece of the osso buco, and took a bite. "The veal is excellent," she said to the table. Dominic let out a low, dark laugh that sent shivers through every hardened criminal in the room. He reached over, wrapping his hand around the thick, soft curve of her thigh, beneath the table, squeezing hard. She had just secured her place in the syndicate. No one would ever question her again. 2 weeks before the wedding, the illusion of untouchability shattered. Despite her new status, Beatrice had refused to abandon sugar and sin. She insisted on fulfilling her remaining high-end catering contracts, a demand Dominic only conceded to under the condition that 4 armed guards remained stationed outside her bakery at all times. It was a rainy Tuesday night. Beatrice was in the back kitchen alone, wearing a white chef's apron over her black leggings and oversized sweater. She was working over a massive copper pot, boiling a batch of specialized spun caramel. The thermometer clipped to the side of the pot read 320 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, the rain lashed against the brick alleyway. She didn't hear the silenced gunshots that dropped her guards in the front of the shop. The heavy steel door of the kitchen kicked open with a deafening crash. Beatrice jumped, grabbing the handle of the copper pot. 3 men stepped into the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen. They were dressed in cheap leather jackets, rain dripping from their brims. The man in the center held a suppressed Glock. Beatrice recognized him instantly from the police files Dominic kept in his office. It was Sal Moretti. The younger brother of the capo Dominic had mutilated at the gala. "Well, well," Sal spat, wiping rain from his face. "The fat bitch who ruined my brother. Vincent can't even eat solid food anymore, but you're in here making candy." Beatrice's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her mind went perfectly, coldly silent. She was trapped. The back exit was locked, and the 3 men blocked the path to the front. "Sal." Beatrice said, her voice steady, keeping her hands resting casually near the stove. "If you pull that trigger, Dominic will hunt down every single person who shares your last name. He won't just kill you, he will erase your bloodline." "Dominic is a fool for letting a broad run his head," Sal snarled, raising the gun, aiming it squarely at Beatrice's chest. "We take you out, he looks weak. The Castiglione family falls, and the Morettis take Chicago. Say goodnight, Baker." As Sal's finger tightened on the trigger, Beatrice moved with explosive, terrifying speed. She didn't run. She didn't cower. She grabbed the heavy handle of the copper pot and hurled the boiling 320-degree liquid caramel directly at them in a massive, sweeping arc. The sticky molten sugar hit Sal and the man to his left, square in the face and chest. The screams that tore through the bakery were inhuman. Boiling water causes severe burns, but boiling sugar is napalm. It sticks to the skin, searing through flesh and muscle instantly. Sal dropped the gun, clawing frantically at his melting face, falling to the linoleum floor in a writhing, shrieking heap. The third man, who had only been splashed on the arm, stumbled backward in horror. He raised his weapon, panic in his eyes, but Beatrice was already moving. She grabbed her 10-inch Wusthof, heavy meat cleaver, from the magnetic strip on the wall. As the third man fired a wild shot that shattered the glass display case in the front room, Beatrice swung the cleaver with the full, heavy momentum of her powerful body. The blade buried itself deep into the man's collarbone. He dropped like a stone, blood spraying across the pristine white tiles of the kitchen. Beatrice stood there, her chest heaving, her apron splattered with blood and hardened droplets of sugar. Sal was still screaming on the floor, the stench of burning flesh filling the sweet air of the bakery. Suddenly, the front doors of the bakery were smashed open. Heavy boots pounded across the hardwood floor. Dominic burst into the kitchen, his Tom Ford topcoat drenched in rain, a custom 1911 pistol gripped tightly in his hand. His eyes were wide, frantic, an emotion no one in the underworld had ever seen him display. He stopped dead in his tracks, taking in the carnage. 3 men down. 2 agonizingly dying from molten sugar, burns, 1 bleeding out from a meat cleaver lodged in his chest. And in the center of it all stood Beatrice, entirely unharmed, holding her ground like an ancient goddess of war. Dominic lowered his gun. He stepped carefully over Sal's thrashing body, his eyes locked entirely on the woman in front of him. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't coddle her. He walked right up to her, grabbed the lapels of her blood-stained apron, and crushed his mouth to hers. It was a desperate, violent, consuming kiss. It tasted of copper and adrenaline. Beatrice dropped her hands, grabbing the wet wool of his coat, pulling him closer, kissing him back with the exact same ferocious intensity. When Dominic finally pulled away, he was breathing heavily, his forehead resting against hers. "I was going to kill them for touching your shop," Dominic whispered, roughly staring down at her with absolute, unhinged devotion. "But you didn't even need me. You're a monster, Beatrice. A beautiful, ruthless monster." "I told you," Beatrice panted, her dark eyes flashing. "I am not a prop. I protect what's mine. And this shop is mine." Dominic's hands slid down to grip her thick waist, his fingers digging into her curves like a drowning man holding on to a lifeline. "You are mine," he corrected softly. "And I am yours. Let the rest of Chicago burn." Dominic turned his head slightly, looking down at Sal Moretti, who was weakly whimpering on the floor. "Carmine!" Dominic called out to his underboss, who had just entered the kitchen and was staring at the scene in shock. "Yes, boss," Carmine managed to say. "Clean up my wife's kitchen, and leave the bodies on the steps of the Moretti compound. Let them know the Queen of Chicago sends her regards." 1 week later, Beatrice Gallagher married Dominic Castiglione at Holy Name Cathedral. She walked down the aisle in a custom heavy ivory silk gown that accentuated every pound, every curve, and every inch of her powerful frame. She did not wear a veil. She looked the city's most dangerous men dead in the eye as she walked past their pews. She had started as a baker, trying to pay off a debt. She ended up holding the leash of the most ruthless predator in the Midwest. And as Dominic slid the heavy platinum band onto her finger, completely enraptured by the woman who had conquered him, the entire criminal underworld finally understood one undeniable truth. You do not cross Beatrice Castiglione, because the only thing more dangerous than the Mafia boss was the fat girl from the South Side who owned his dark, twisted soul. If you loved this intense, twist-filled Mafia romance, you won't want to miss our next dark story. Tap that like button to support Beatrice's badass revenge. Share this video with your romance-obsessed friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, real-life-inspired drama drops every single week. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. What would you have done in Beatrice's place? Let us know in the comments below.